Cleaner Air for Scotland is going to be launched by our Minister for Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform on the 4th of November. And I feel a bit embarrassed about actually promoting another conference at this conference, but it will be promoted and launched at the Scottish Transport Emissions Partnership Conference on the 4th of November in Edinburgh. So the Minister will launch the Cleaner Air for Scotland. If you've not noticed already, the name has changed. We've changed it from the Low Emission Strategy for several reasons. First is we wanted to include the word air in the title, and also to get away from this idea that low emissions strategy had connotations purely with climate change, and rightly so, that emissions have been driven over the good number of years by the climate change story, but we wanted the title to reflect actually what the topic was. I think actually in the 1980s, BT had it right when they said it was good to talk, because that's exactly what we're doing up in Scotland. We're trying to develop a strategy that has cross-government national support at both the national level and the local government level, but also bringing in businesses, non-governmental organisations, charities, and individuals into the debate. So the topic from the Healthy Air campaign was looking for each government department to have an ability to influence air quality. And I guess that's part of the reason why you've got me today from Transport Scotland. So for those of you who don't know, Transport Scotland are an agency of the Scottish Government. We are, in terms of air quality, responsible for the trunk roads in Scotland. We don't have influence on the local authority roads because that is the responsibility of the local authorities. But in terms of the solution that we're looking for air quality, we're trying to get cross-governmental support on air quality policy, transport, planning and health. Of course, air quality is in the news, and probably rightly so again. I've purposely not included an image of Volkswagen in this story because I knew others would do it, but it's getting into the papers, and it's by far, I think, the biggest environmental issue that's getting into the national press. It's also getting into the very highest levels of policy. This is the UN Sustainable Development Goals, where air and air quality is mentioned at least twice, particularly in the goal number 11, where it's looking to look at the adverse effects on impacts of cities, including air quality. So it's getting there, it's getting into the public consciousness. In Scotland, we know where the problems are. We've got a number of air quality management areas that are declared. The map on the top is at city space. The map on the bottom in Kpis, which I'll touch upon in a little while, is at the local level. And I'll make no apologies for mentioning the word local as many times as I can in this presentation. The solutions are at a localised level in Scotland, and that's where we're targeting. We've had numerous conversations with professionals over the years. Very recently we had a LAQM review and have picked out a whole raft of areas where improvements can be made, one of which is having a national air quality plan. That's where the Cleaner Air for Scotland is going. But we also know where the barriers are to implementing, and I think just in the previous question there was the lack of local authority control over some sources. So the Kpis document is looking to take the local authority control and weave that in with the trunk road control as well. So a brief summary of how we've got to where we are in developing the Kpis. We undertook a consultation, which I'll touch upon in a second, and it raised a whole series of topics and issues and questions and words. The word up on the screen shows the most common words that were picked out, and probably just as importantly, think of the words that weren't mentioned. So things like Euro standards, which is this very small word here on the row here. So it's interesting to see what words were chiming and what words were not with the consultees. Consultees had a number of hot topics that were picked out. I'll not go through all of them, but needless to say, they were talking about smart actions that are time-bound, wanted to see coordination at both EU and UK level, which hopefully we're trying to do. And they wanted central government to be responsible as well, not just putting it all onto the local authorities. And it must be a joint effort. Of course, I couldn't come to today without mentioning the consultation response that the Institute of Air Quality Management actually put in themselves. So they said, we've got to recognise the transboundary issues particularly PM2.5, and of course liaising with the UK. They wanted fewer but more targeted actions. That's what you've got. We started off with a very long list, and now we've got a not so very long list, and emphasis on actions on the ground. But the Institute also picked up that there was further work to be done in terms of looking at planning authorities and what planning development control can bring in, and for example looking at low-cost sensors and the work that needs to be done to make sure that the data that they collect can be woven into the models in the future. So, like I say, we've had the consultation earlier this year. We have had a number of other engagements with our stakeholders, looking at pre- and post-consultation workshops, which I'll touch upon in a second, telephone surveys, one-to-one structured interviews, and we're also looking at an elected members workshop for councillors that have AQMAs, and that will take place at the end of November, so to champion the CAFs to those elected members. If there's one document I could draw you to particularly, that is to look at the Low Emission Strategy workshop report that was produced by Sniffer in June. Why I'm drawing attention to that is essentially a distillation of all of the consultation comments that we got together, not in a room dissimilar to this. We distilled down a good number of those consultation comments to probably what were the top 10 in each of the topical areas. So if there's one document I would say to go and have a read of or contact us to get hold of, it would be that one. So CAFS itself will look something like this. It'll have a series of sections that go towards, on the top right, the 6 objectives. And those objectives will be framed around both a mission and a vision statement. So up until very recently, the vision statement was that Scotland's air quality would be amongst the best in Europe. But given that we've got the tightest and strongest climate change legislation in the world, the Minister for Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform wanted the vision to be stronger. So we've changed that very recently to Scotland's air quality to be the best in Europe. So think about that for a second. That's the vision that we've got for air quality in Scotland. We've got 6 objectives that we've picked out, of course, transport being central to that. And I'll touch upon communications in a second because it's a topic that several speakers have mentioned so far already. Just running quite quickly through some of the objectives. We've got existing policy actions, and for example in the transport section looking at the National Walking Strategy, building up and making the bus operators grant and the Green Bus Fund that bit stronger in its next round of grant awards. But we're also looking at, on the bottom bullet point here, looking at the trunk road impacts that are being had on air quality management areas. So this is Transport Scotland taking responsibility for the air quality management issues that we on our trunk road are the primary cause of. So this is the main street in Crieff, just outside Perth. So recent work that Atkins did for us, they've picked out where the pinch point is on the main street, and it's not rocket science. So I think in terms of this local issue, it's looking at the white lining where the trunk road is here. The trunk road then moves up to the north, but the vehicles that want to move through that junction are having to stop as a result of traffic coming along local roads that you can see in the distance. So it's simply, in my case, looking at the white lining and the route prioritisation at that point to see whether we can get some sort of solution. I put this up. This was an email that I received from an unnamed environmental health officer, and I got this and looked at it and thought, do I laugh or cry or cheer when I get that email? So this email is saying that we've got funding for some surveys on our local air quality management plan, but could you, Transport Scotland, give us, the local authority, some advice on where to get high quality traffic data? So surely my first thought is, go and speak to your roads manager in your local authority. They should have that information. So I don't know if that's been unfair to the environmental health officer, but it made me think at least they're contacting us to try and find out amongst their peers what is the best form of high quality traffic data that they can get hold of. So we're working together to try and find that solution. In terms of placemaking, we've had building standards and our planners involved at the very early stages of the CAF's production, looking at the actions that can go into placemaking, not least of which is looking at the revisions of the Scottish planning policy guidance and the next round of National Planning Framework to make sure that air quality is woven in at the very beginning of the developments of those documents. From health, we've had input from Health Protection Scotland to develop the particular health narrative, and I think hopefully we've tightened that up in comparison to what was in the consultation document, but not least of which is twofold. Firstly, looking at making sure that NHS boards take into account air quality through joint health protection plans, and also looking at the adoption, or not looking at, adopting the World Health Organization guidelines for both PM10 and PM2.5 into our legislation. You might have heard me already ask at least one question today on communication and a national awareness campaign. It's not by chance that this is one of the areas that I'll be leading on in the CAF's production. And this statement sort of chimed with me in terms of an output from the government's environmental committee, looking at recommendations on where improvements in air quality can be made. And one point that the Healthy Air Policy Call picked out in particular is that an awareness-raising campaign can be one of these, or if not the single most important tool to improve air quality. So on the back of that, we're looking to develop a communication strategy by April next year that will go towards ensuring that all citizens are well-informed, engaged, and empowered to make the changes. Because again, it's not just central or local government that will make all of these changes happen. It has to come down to the individual. And I think I maybe need to have a chat with Poppy from GLA to effectively steal her Breathing Better Together campaign. Is that a better use of public money? It probably is. So we know from climate change campaigning in Scotland what to do and what not to do. We've been told from a climate change perspective to make the messaging easy and normal, use very basic language like green, which for me absolutely grates against everything that I know, but use easy and normal language. Have to make people realise what they've already achieved. They're on a journey. Don't demonise. Pick out what they've already done, but make people see the bigger picture. But also, make sure that you avoid conveying air quality as some sort of weird or undoable activity that you can't be part of. We've been told also to not overload people, to focus on what is achievable, but don't make people feel bad. People don't like being told off. So that's the messaging that we've been told through behavioural science interviews and research that 2CV have undertaken for Scottish Government. It's not just at central government as well. We know that the local government are taking forward campaigning on air quality, and I really quite like this picture because they've managed to get in both the air quality monitoring stations and the communication campaign within one particular AQMA, and I think this is just north of Glasgow. We've been told if you're communicating to your audiences, it has to come from both a reputable source, whether that's the medical community, like we've heard this morning, from scientists, NGOs. Government actually wasn't in that list. So are we reputable? But we have to make sure that the message is going out to the agents of change that can make a difference, and particularly looking at employers and businesses as one of those agents. We've looked in the CAF's production at trying to develop key audiences and identify who those key audiences are. So that is looking at particularly the general public, both local and national government, and businesses. And all three of those have been, we hope, involved in the production of the CAFs at some stage, whether through consultation, workshopping, interviews, or others. I think it's worth pointing out the topic on the left, where we had the likes of DHL and others involved in the development of working groups that have been central to produce elements of the CAFS document. So hearing exactly what businesses want, rather than us assuming that we know best, has been quite enlightening. We've got a governance arrangement set up for CAFS, which is morphing from what was already in place through the Scottish Urban Air Quality Steering Group. That will now cease to exist and turn into something else, probably a CAFS governance group, although we probably have to come up with a better acronym for that. But it'll look something not dissimilar to this, where we have the CAFS mission, vision, objectives and actions surrounded by a governance group that will report into Scottish ministers, but also have a series of working groups that will be defined by the objectives within that document. And then that will bleed out into organisations like STEP, trade associations, institutions, UK government and wider. Two elements that are particularly new within CAFS that I'd like to spend a few minutes on are two related frameworks. The first is a national modelling framework, which is looking to provide standard air quality assessment methodology at both the national and regional level. And the regional models will be used at the local basis to inform air quality mitigation. This work has been led by SEPA, who have got experience in modelling, albeit from a marine perspective in the past. They're now moving into the land and particularly into air quality. So they have the specialist technical knowledge to undertake modelling at both the national and local level. They're looking to provide open access modelling tools such as Spotfire and MATLAB, which I'll show in the next slide. But they understand, I think, that traffic data is key to that. And lo and behold, Transport Scotland and SEPA are actually talking to make sure that they get that data. So SEPA can see that there's a potential to actually undertake that modelling on behalf of the local authorities. Over the last year, SEPA have been working with Aberdeen City Council to develop a strategic approach to problem solving using the harms-based approach. So they know what the problem is, how can they go to solve that? So in terms of air quality in Aberdeen, they've looked at gathering data across a selection of areas, including traffic, weather, street characteristics, plugging them into Spotfire to allow a readily easy, digestible form of communication to anyone that would want to use that information. So that's the beauty of what applications like Spotfire provide. So in terms of developing the national modelling framework, we're looking at where we can store that information, both in terms of the air quality measurements and also the traffic-based information within a place where everyone can get access to that information in a form of datable or big urban data setup. But that data from the national modelling framework will then inform the models that will support the second of the frameworks, which is the Low Emission Framework. The National Low Emission Framework has a series of stages, and this is based on work that we've undertaken recently with Kpis. It will follow a tried and tested approach that's been set up through the Scottish Transport Appraisal Guidance. So a form of pre-appraisal to understand what areas could or potentially should go through the National Modelling Framework stages. A two-stage approach in terms of an initial, followed by potentially a detailed appraisal of air quality for particular areas. And then that will lead into implementation and the management and evaluation of the framework deliverables. So the National Low Emission Framework, like I say, is following the principles of STAG. It's not new. It's using tried and tested approaches to appraisal. It's looking initially, or was initially looking at a National Low Emission Zone framework. But what we felt was that was too narrow an approach. We quite like the idea that we want to have a framework that looks at access control and access regulations. So we want the National Low Emission Framework to work with the LAQM process to encourage and demand local authorities that, where applicable, to assess what access control would be applicable for their particular local area. The results of that may find that an LEZ would work best, or a form of clean air zone, although it's debatable what the difference is between the two of those. It might be a form of low emission neighbourhood that's already been described for London, or some other form of managed AQMA. But what we're looking to do between now and April next year is to develop the technical guidance that will underpin the National Low Emission Framework. And that, amongst other things, will outline what are the guidelines at a national level for low emission zones or other forms of access control to be set up, so that you have a consistent approach to LEZ or other forms of access control right across Scotland. Like I said, we've got a rough timeline of when we're looking to make sure that the access controls are implemented. We've got 2018-19 here as a date for targeted implementation. Whether that gets the agreement of all of our audiences, right through from NGOs through to business, is to be debated. That's the conversations that we're going to have between now and April. So finishing off, we've got a set of KPIs, a short set of KPIs, and a commitment to reporting as part of the CAFs as well. So the KPIs are in two forms. Firstly, to look at percentage reductions in the key gases of NO2 and PM10, and also to look at activities that are indicators of change. So these are the KPIs that we've got just now. It's not to say that these will be the KPIs that we maintain year on year on year. We might look to develop further KPIs, but these are the ones that we've identified through consultation at this point in time. And annual reporting is perhaps underplayed to a certain extent, because public bodies in Scotland from next year are going to be required to produce annual sustainability reports. So it's part of the climate change legislation through climate change duties that annual reporting on sustainability will be mandatory for public bodies in Scotland. So there's a place for air quality and the delivery of the actions in CAFs to be recorded through those annual reports. So in terms of next steps, I've mentioned that we've got an elected members workshop with councillors. In fact, we've got 3 workshops in Glasgow, Edinburgh, and I think it's Dundee, to try and win the hearts and minds of the councillors who have got a good number of officials working for them, but so that they can understand the importance of good, cleaner air within their area. We're looking to launch, and will launch, the CAFs at the STEP conference in early November, and we're aiming to produce technical guidance and tools for at least the National Low Emission Framework by April. Also, we're looking to develop the communication strategy, at least an outline of that, by April 2016, although I'm probably underplaying the level of work that would be required to produce that from scratch, hence the reason why I'm probably going to plagiarise what Greater London Authority have already done. Did I say plagiarise? I mean ask for. And we're also looking at a traffic data collection exercise next year as well. And what you can see in the screen there, just when you get the slides, is an example of the letters that we've put out to elected members to say, this is why we think air quality is important. It might not have been on your radar before. It's been on your officials' radar. It might not have been on your radar before. So here's a chance to learn what CAFs is all about. In terms of a summary then, what we've learnt in this journey in developing CAFs, and when I say we, that's a mixture of Scottish Government, Transport Scotland, SEPA, Health Protection Scotland, a good number of the local authorities, and particularly including Glasgow City Council, who have been providing us a local authority perspective. What we've learned is a whole series of what to do and what not to do in developing such a strategy. Not least of which is looking at understanding that funding is key, but spending reviews will dictate what is provided to air quality. It's making sure that the air quality is at least included within the mix in the spending review decision making. We know that we've got to understand who our key audiences are, who wants to hear about air quality and what difference can they make. We know that there's a clear link to health that the CAF's message must be sold upon. That's why Health Protection Scotland have been central to developing this strategy. But I quite like the one on the top line to second from from your left, which is don't underestimate the resource. Particularly local authorities are being taxed with fewer and fewer resources, but bigger and bigger asks. So we have to be realistic of what can be done at a local level within a period of time. That's just a reality of where we are. So I'll finish off with what I started, which was a call for government departments to influence air quality. And government departments being plural, they all have a role to play to influence air quality. And there should be a cross-government national air quality strategy. We hope that is what's going to be delivered on the 4th of November at the STEP conference. So thank you very much.
Just whilst people are thinking of a question, you mentioned the National Modelling Framework. Yeah. Presumably that will create a model for Scotland for air quality.
Yes.
So which will trump, will that override the UK model, which is reported to Brussels? Because the UK model reports to Brussels exceedances and areas like that. And yet that's much criticised because it ignores many areas of high pollution.
Yeah.
So you're going to have your own model.
Yeah.
And the UK-wide model, which trumps which?
That's a good question. All the conversations that we've had so far is that the use of the National Modelling Framework from a Scottish perspective will be the one that will get the attention of the local authorities. So I think there's still, I guess, an agreement that has to be made between where the National Modelling Framework and the National Low Emission Framework sits within the LAQM process. But at this point in time, it may well be that there's a dovetailing or production of the data from those two models, but the National Modelling Framework from a Scottish perspective is the one that the local authorities will be using in anger from next year onwards.
The significance is that Bath, near here, has got a massive exceedance area, but under the UK model, it doesn't exist, and that's caused quite a lot of friction, and it's undermined the model. If your model finds exceedances and they're not reported to Brussels, it will. Do you see the
yeah.
friction there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Questions on the floor?
Hi, I'm Richard Claxton from Ether. I was just interested to know. I know that there's been some good work on the climate change side in Scotland as well. A lot of the work that SSN, the Sustainable Scotland Network, have done. If there's any link up in your approach with them and what's going on in climate change in terms of local action and tracking action and that type of thing.
Yeah. When we were developing Kpis, we also had, within one of the working groups that developed it, we had a sustainability working group. And initially we asked George Tarvett from SSN to chair that group. And his answer to that was no, because I'm doing SSN. But to keep us aware of the work that we're doing on sustainability. So I think it was one of I think it was the head of sustainability for SEPA took on that role, but linked back into SSN to make sure that the recommendations that the sustainability working group picked up on chimed with what SSN were recommending to local authorities as well. But in addition to that, the SSN website is a place where all of the all of the public body climate change reports are going to be stored. So it's within those climate change reports that air quality could potentially have a place from year on year in terms of its annual reporting. I don't think at this point in time there is a place for that, but the guidance that SSN are writing on behalf of the Scottish Government is fluid. So the SSN steering group, of which I contribute to, can influence the sustainability reporting so that air quality has a place on that.